been like, do I talk? And it says that I'm live on air, but am I really live on air? Hey everyone, it's Christy, and I am back with one of my favorite people in the world to talk to, Will Fox, and we haven't talked about American politics and the presidential race for quite a while because we've both been quite busy with other things and summer stuff, but as we are heading into less than 75 days now, I think, until Decision 2016. I am really pleased to have Will back on air to talk about, in particular, the Trump campaign because it is such an unusual approach to presidential campaigning. So for those of you, I've got some new viewers since the last time you were on, Will, would you like to do a short introduction of yourself and your channel and where people can find you and maybe your most recent video?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everybody. My name is Will. I run the channel Political Junkie News, and I do politics and history videos. My most recent video is about the Brexit, which I know now is no longer topical and interesting, but I still like it. It's an analysis of Article 50, and it's a collaboration with another YouTuber who does etymological videos and name explaining videos. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can check out my channel, Political Junkie News. And as always, I'm really happy to be here talking with Christy about politics because, yeah, I'm a junkie, she's a junkie, and it's always a good exchange between the two of us.
We totally geek out together. And I'm just going to say, I'll answer this question myself and then kick it over to you. But the reason why I'm I'm generally fascinated with elections, especially presidential elections. But this time, it's unlike, at least in my view, anything else we've ever seen in American politics for so many reasons. And as a political scientist, as someone who studies elections, it's like this outlier case study of just, if you are a political scientist who knows how campaigns traditionally operate, the Trump campaign is like bizarro world. You're just like, why are they doing this? And so that, for me, is why I always spend more time talking about Trump than Clinton, because Clinton's a very conventional candidate, but he is just a unique case study. Do you feel the same, Will?
I'm not as excited as you are. Actually, Christy, the last time we spoke was, I think, 4 months ago. I went back and kind of checked the tape, yeah? And the last time we spoke, we were talking history. We were talking about whether Trump was going to get the nomination stolen from him by the Republicans. And so we were comparing like 1964, 1968, 1912. And you're right, now that this time has passed and Trump is the nominee, there's no longer any history to refer to. I mean, maybe Barry Goldwater, but not really. I think even Barry Goldwater's wife said that Barry Goldwater would hate Donald Trump. So there's nothing. You're right. It's a total outlier. We're in uncharted territory. It's exciting and depressing.
Yes, I agree on both counts. Now, I think in previous chats, we've used the 4 M's to help us organize the analysis of the Trump campaign, and we've decided to do that again just because it allows us to really, in an easy way, create a narrative that goes through point by point the things in a campaign that you need to do to win, and kind of compare what normally happens to what Trump does. And we talked about this off air, so I'm going to kind of kick it over to you. So just for the viewers, we might not do it in this order, but the 4 M's are money, machinery, momentum, and message. We don't have to take them in that order, but yeah, Will, do you want to kick us off in terms of one of the 4 M's and the Trump campaign in sort of coming into September of 2016?
So I think the best M to start on is momentum, which I think logically most people would want to end with momentum. But I think that momentum is a good place to start, and I'll tell you why. It gives us a decent overview of what's happening right now. I was out of the country. I was away for 2 weeks without internet. I was in the wilderness, yeah? And during that time, the race shifted. The Democratic convention had just ended. And when I left, the polling was relatively close. When I came back, the polling was nowhere near close, and Hillary Clinton had pulled away. If you look at the electoral map today, if you look at the Real Clear Politics, and I looked at 538, Hillary Clinton, in current polling, if the election were today, already has, without the swing states, 272 electoral votes, in theory, of course. That's quite a change, and that's quite a momentum. If that's the way we want to describe it, that just will be hard for Trump to overcome. That being said, there's no momentum, in my opinion, right now. I don't know if you agree, because everything's kind of leveled off. We're in a bit of a stasis right now. Both candidates have had some bad news recently. Trump, of course, with his immigration policy and his campaign shakeup, and Hillary with her Clinton Foundation, it seems that there's been a bit of a leveling off. I want to get your opinion before I keep talking, but I do have some numbers as well that might interest the listening audience.
I think when we look back on history, we're going to see the Republican convention as the turning point. It's the official time when Trump went from being the nominee, from being the presumptive nominee and a primary candidate to being a general election candidate. And normally when a candidate has their nomination, they get a lot of good press for the week or the few days around that convention, at least more so than others, because a lot of their surrogates are out on television. The race is being looked at closely, and there's a lot of human interest stories normally and things that make people warm up to the candidate. And Trump did get a slight convention bounce. The other thing about convention bounces is they're ephemeral. Generally, they tend to go up and then go down. You'll see this too when the debates happen. You might see a momentary change, for the week or two after the debate, but things really, unless it's massive, don't change the structure of a debate. So we saw a little bit of a Trump bounce, but then he just went on when the Democratic convention started. He's just gone from blunder to blunder to blunder to blunder to blunder, all self-inflicted wounds. Entirely self-inflicted wounds. If Donald Trump had gone on vacation right after the Republican nomination, or after the Republican convention, not done any press, just sat on his butt, in Florida for this entire time, he would be doing much better. He would be doing much, much better. And it's been fascinating to see, basically, as you say, the structure of the campaign now has taken a shape. But the shape it's taken can, I think, be traced directly back to the Republican convention and how Trump organized it and all of the things he said in response to the Democratic convention that has just led to a series of public gaffes. So, that's where I think
agree.
momentum.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say I agree with you that was the momentum changer. Specifically, I think there were two things at the Democratic National Convention that sealed the deal as well, and that was Michelle Obama's speech, which was incredibly powerful and well written. I also have a major problem with it, which I'll tell you later. But the second thing was the father of the Muslim soldier. That moment is as close as you can get to a viral moment in presidential politics that will likely be replayed as we talk about the history of this election cycle. There was so much drama. There was so much drama at the Republican National Convention. Trump promised us a reality show, and it was a gamble when he did it. He followed through. There was the plagiarism controversy. There was the Cruz speech. There was the giant Trump letters, as he told us we were all about to die in his headliner speech. He delivered, but he just targeted the wrong audience.
Right. Can we talk a little bit about the Ted Cruz speech? And at least to me, it's quite symptomatic of the breaking apart of the Republican Party, how it is coming apart at the seams with people dividing themselves up into subgroups. Before, the Republican Party was considered a three-legged stool with the evangelicals, the neocons, and then the establishment Republicans. And it feels like that fundamental structure now is shifting, but rather than being the three-legged stool, they seem to be magnets that are pushing away from each other.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm not as like the Republican Party certainly has flaws right now and is definitely. I think I heard a talking head on the news this morning refer to it as like the post-black box scenario, where now it's an autopsy of the entire party. Perhaps, but I think, and maybe we'll talk about this later, but the congressional races, the Senate races, the presidential races is somewhat isolated, and we don't know for sure that this will translate to down ballot losses for the Republicans. All the money that Trump would have been raising is now going to down ballot. We could very much have a situation that is almost no different than it is today after the election's over. Strange as it would be, after all the momentum, after all the chaos of the 2016 election, we could have a Republican House and Senate and a Democratic president and be stuck in the status quo for another 4 years, or at least another 2 years.
I definitely see
the Republican Party's that splintered.
I guess I disagree, but we can talk about that. In terms of momentum, though, I think maybe we should talk a little bit about why people shouldn't really pay attention to national polls as much as the state polls, and it's going to go back to that map you talked about. Did you want to talk about that, or should I pick that up?
I have my data here. Yeah.
Go ahead. So, there we go. Woo-hoo.
272
Data
is
geeks.
where Hillary was already projected. So technically she's already projected to win. That's subject to change. There's 112 electoral votes that were still toss-ups. And of them, the top five is in terms of population electoral votes, then Ohio, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, what the heck, hasn't gone Republican since 1992. All of those are trending towards Clinton by 2 points in North Carolina, 3 points in Florida, and 5 points in Ohio. So that in and of itself, in the toss-up states that still remain, that map isn't looking good for Donald Trump. Taking a look down a little bit, you've got Arizona 11 electoral votes, and it's got Trump up by 1.3. So in no sense is it looking good for Donald Trump. And as we talk about machinery later on, the Clinton campaign is putting field offices in states that in a normal election would never, like Democrats wouldn't even bother visiting. They would fly over them and go onto the swing states. And they're going there to contest now because Donald Trump's campaign is 90% media and hats and 10% actually ground game or less.
Utah.
Is one of them.
Yeah.
Utah.
And it's people can talk about why she would do this, and it's really, if you think about, I mean, I kind of compare sometimes the presidential race to American football, in that it's a game of territory and taking over territory. And by putting offices in Utah, she is trying to put Trump even more on the back foot, have to spend more money that should not have to be spent in places that should be safe. And all of that takes away resources and time and attention and effort from swing states. So tactically, even though she might not win, she's not going to win Utah. If she wins Utah, we could be looking at Ronald Reagan numbers, when he ran against Mondale. But just by having a presence there, it does put the Trump, people who pay attention to this and are savvy, put the Trump people on notice that they are coming into your backyard now.
Shots fired.
Yeah, yes. It comes back to this momentum. And the reason why, if you look at why Trump is performing poorly, you have to, look at, as you said, the states that are in play. And then from our perspective, if you go down deeper, why are these states in play? It all comes back to demographics, and demographics being destiny. This morning, before we came on air, I was reading a Politico piece about student Republican groups on campuses. They only featured Yale and Penn, I think, so East Coast schools. But on those campuses, the college Republicans some of them are not, I think the Penn group didn't endorse Trump.
Yeah.
And
the Harvard group didn't either, I think.
Yeah, and the Yale group split into two groups, one that does and one that doesn't. And all of this is a reflection of the fact that Trump is doing terribly with college-educated whites in particular. Obviously, he tanks with anyone, like the minorities and ethnic backgrounds that are non-white ethnic backgrounds. And he also does poorly with women across the board. But he's got a new fissure, or like a wedge, that he's driven into his own base that is separating out college-educated whites from whites with less than college education. To be honest, I know it's high school. I don't know what the some college group is doing, but if you look at people with a degree, they're finding it very difficult to support Trump. I think because it's just he talks nonsense, and for those people, then they listen to him on a level that, if you've gone through college and you've just been exposed to different kinds of ways of thinking and analysis that you don't get, frankly, when you're in high school, that it's very disturbing for those people to hear Trump, because they hear things differently than people with a high school education, who might be thinking, oh, well, he said this thing on immigration that I like, so as long as he said that thing that I like, yeah, he might soften his stance, but I'm not really he said the thing I like, so I'm gonna stick with him. Whereas people with who've done, the debating skills, or had to write essays, pro and con, and look at both sides of an argument and practice, might just realize that he's making things up as he goes. So yeah, the demographics here are really important in states like Virginia and other states with higher proportions of college-educated voters. You're seeing that kind of movement away from Trump within the Republican base, and frankly, an unprecedented way, because Romney won college-educated whites last time around.
There's going to be a conflict here between, the first question is, what do those people do on election day? Do they stay home? They're probably not going to vote for Clinton. They could. Some of them probably will. There's the second question of, the Libertarian candidate, which I know seems slightly off topic, but polling is consistently showing now that Gary Johnson, who's polling at 10% in national polls, is taking more from Clinton than from Trump. And obviously Jill Stein is going to be taking more from Clinton than Trump as well. So those two groups, the Democrats who are defecting to the Libertarian of all places, and the Republicans who are defecting either to their couch or perhaps a few to Hillary Clinton, will they balance each other out, or will that become more distinctly reflected in the polls as time goes on? Let me just add one more thing, since we're on the point of data, and that is, I looked at my home state, Texas, 8.4% up for Trump, 6 in a different poll, a PPP poll. So, I mean, that should be 20 points. You know, and then going back to Utah, you mentioned earlier, Utah went 70% for Romney in 2012. 70% because of the people whose name starts with M and ends with Orman, yeah? But nonetheless, it's just amazing that they can even consider that. South Carolina is another state where the Clinton campaign is just putting down roots for the heck of it, you know, to send a message.
Yeah, and I think for you know, I've got anecdotally, this isn't you know, this isn't generalizable in any way, but anecdotally, I've got Republican family members who are basically like gone over to Gary Johnson, and I think it's, and Wisconsin, of course, was the one state that had a serious Never Trump movement that stopped. It basically kind of gave the state to Ted Cruz in part because it was a rejection of Trump. So you've got the Charlie Sykes here. There was an interesting piece on Charlie Sykes dealing with his own callers who were comparing Muslims to dogs, and he was reflecting on the fact that perhaps he and other talk radio have contributed to this. Like, really, I think. But there is it's not a natural home for Trump here in Wisconsin. We've got Paul Ryan, who he has ticked off. Scott Walker, obviously, is not a big Trump fan. And Ron, the senator here, Ron Johnson. Ron Johnson or Ron Johnston? I think it's Ron Johnson. I don't know why I keep sticking a T in there. Maybe it just sounds better. But he's a bit cozy with Trump, but not. I think he's getting punished for it in the polls. So there are people here who can't vote for Trump, and they also feel like they can't vote for Clinton. So those sort of moderate, more business type Republicans, I think they do find Gary Johnson a vote of conscience. It might not be, he won't win, but at least he's a person I can vote for. And if that is where the Republican Party is putting their own voters, it shows the crisis of conscience to me within the party generally.
I agree, and I also want to go back one step. Earlier I said I don't think the party's that divided. That's not true. I do think the party's divided, but I guess I'm just depressed at the number of down ballot Republicans who just seem to be quiet. I think this is one of those moments where you have to speak up. Donald Trump's not just some ordinary, like, poor performing candidate. Even Ted Cruz, if he was the nominee, you know, I wouldn't expect Republicans to rebel. But Trump is a different level of disturbing, and I just find it appalling that someone like John McCain can just quietly basically get slapped in the face by Trump and even by his primary challenger, who called him old and like withering or something this week. It's just, it makes me sad to see how sycophantic and sad all these Republicans can be. But you're right, there is going to be a split in the actual voters, and the future of the party is certainly up in the air. To go to what you mentioned about Gary Johnson, and I'll hand it back to you, maybe we can talk about money next. In terms of Gary Johnson, I have two opinions. The first opinion is that I think it's abhorrent that the guy is polling at 10% and yet will not be in the debate if things hold the way they are right now. I have strong opinions about third parties, and actually my next video is going to be about Ralph Nader in 2000, and it's not going to be nice. And so I have strong opinions about third parties. That being said, I think it's atrocious that you can get 10% of the electorate choosing you, and you still don't get in the debate. That's just terrible. Anyway, yeah, that's my thought.
No, that's absolutely great. And just to let you know, I'm getting a little bit, I think when you're moving, your cord is brushing a bit, and it's not too bad, but just to let you know that, yeah, maybe hold it or something so everyone gets every word you say, because what you're saying is great. So yeah, the demographics here, the reason why national polls might tighten or might, you know, get wider, I don't tend to pay attention to those. I'm looking more state by state and adding up how many electoral college votes Clinton is ahead by. And when you get to a double-digit lead, that's really getting, you know, you can basically just start moving that off. Because even if she lost 5% of that 10% gap on election day, she's still going to win by 5%. The other thing that I wanted to say was about turnout. And I think the thing is, we get closer to the election, obviously, we're going to be looking at turnout models. Polls before Labor Day, especially, were using all registered voters a lot of times. So if you were on a voting register or you had voted in the past, you would be sampled by these polling firms in order to get your opinion. But as we get closer to election day, they switch from all registered voters to likely voters. Just because your name is on the electoral register doesn't mean you're going to turn out. There are some characteristics of people who turn out at a higher rate than others. So older people are more likely to vote than younger people. Wealthier people are more likely to vote than poorer people. And college-educated voters are more likely to vote than people with a high school education. And this is also where you get some of those big gaps now appearing on the state level, because again, we talked before about Trump losing the white college-educated voters. The reason you're seeing some of those gaps in the states is because not only is he dividing the white vote compared to previous Republican candidates through this education wedge, but also those voters are more likely to vote. Now we're gonna see. I know that there's a lot of talk about the invisible Trump voter. I think that's personally, I think it's a lot of rubbish. But I think on election day, what will be important is I think that motivated Democrats and motivated Trump voters will certainly get out to the polls. Maybe motivated Republicans who are going to vote for Johnson out of conscience or just leave the presidential box empty are going to vote. But what will swing it, and maybe in some places, is whether or not this entire campaign has turned off people who aren't identified as either a Republican or Democrat, independents as they are called, and whether they decide to go to the ballot at all, or if they're just turned off by the election. And
that was my next question for you, actually. Not to cut you off, but I think you can add this maybe into your point. Is one of the other data points I was looking at was specifically was Hillary Clinton's favorability numbers, which is on the rise at the moment. It's not good, but it's going up, and she's sitting at 44% favorability. And if you look at the graph, the polling data, it's going up. Now, I wouldn't expect it to go much higher, but do you think the favorability ratings of the candidates will have a big impact on turnout?
I think, well, yes, but it's going to be mixed. Precisely like you were saying, I think there are going to be Democrats who are going to be very motivated to go out and vote against Trump. And I think there are probably people who are very anti-Trump because they find him scary, who are going to be motivated to go out and vote against Trump. And then, of course, the Trump lovers, the Trumpeters, are going to go out and vote for him. But those independent voters that might be turned off might just be, this is crap, it doesn't matter, they're both the same, which isn't true. But, they might just be kind of shut down and be less engaged than in a previous election. If that is the case, that might, well, I would predict that that would favor Clinton, because one of the things that we've seen traditionally is if you ask people for their partisan identification, women are more likely to give a partisan identification, and women disproportionately identify as Democrats, whereas men, because they're like, oh, I'm politically independent, I'm an independent, but then they go vote straight Republican ticket.
I don't know any men like that. I don't know.
Okay, if you look at
that's definitely not how I behave. Yeah, I'm not one of those men.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, it's not specific in the aggregate. So if it is that segment of voters, that independents that stay away, that could hurt Republican candidates, because that is that people who identify themselves as being politically independent but then end up voting for the Republican anyway. They just don't want to identify as Republican. However, I haven't seen the most recent demographics on independent voters, and they are now, I think, the largest group now. I think they out-poll in terms of identification both Republicans and Democrats. It's sort of like independents, Democrats, and then Republicans in rank order.
Independents are now 40. I'm just researching this for my latest video. 42% is the number of independents. And if you take out the leaners, the people who are probably going to vote D or R regardless, even though they call themselves independents, that leaves about 5%. So that 5% of, I call them uninformed voters, some people call them independent-minded, still remain.
Yeah. And the other thing that we don't really know is what impact Trump is going to have on ticket splitting. Will people go to the polls and not vote for Trump but continue to vote for the Republican candidate in their area? Or will some Republicans be so demotivated by the election that they decide to stay away or only vote in a couple races? All of that is left to be seen. And as we were pointing to before, if Clinton has a Republican Senate and House, we're basically going to get the same kind of intransigent where we don't see anything done on Puerto Rico, we don't see anything done on Zika, we don't see anything done on the transportation budget for another at least 2 years. So American politics is not going to be fixed in any meaningful way, I think, after this election. What might happen, in my personal biased best case scenario, is that we flip the Senate and that Ryan's majority in the House is dropped to such a point where he has to go to the Democrats more often in order to pass legislation because the Freedom Caucus will not compromise with him in any way, and that will force him to give the Democrats some kind of leverage and say over what kind of legislation is passed. So I think in terms of like the best case scenario, I think that's what Clinton is looking at. The other thing though is if we do get a Republican Congress again, we're going to see more taxpayer-funded investigations into pointless things for years and years, and millions of dollars in time and effort wasted into basically taxpayer-funded political witch hunts.
Wow, that's the optimistic possibility.
That's our best case scenario. Yeah.
How's my audio? Is the cord thing making any trouble?
Yeah, actually, I didn't want to say because I didn't want to interrupt like you, but yes, the quality is the rubbing sound is gone now. So
okay, that's good.
Yeah. So going into momentum-wise, going forward, Trump has got some really huge problems. He's lost his momentum, and now he is in a deep hole and is having to find ways of making friends with people that he's been alienating, trying to find a way to connect with voters in a completely new way. And so, yes, his momentum is the problem, and Clinton's momentum, the wind is to her back and the wind is to his face.
Yeah.
I think we would agree.
I think we would. I would say that it's a light wind to her back, but there is a wind.
Yeah, I think barring some kind of like major health crisis or some, like that, I don't see how she's not going to win.
Yeah, I don't see it either, but they'll play this clip back and laugh at us at some point. There was a point in our hangouts. It might have been a year ago now. I don't know how long we've been doing these, but there was a point where I stated the opinion that I didn't think that Republicans walking in the voting booth would be able to eventually pull the lever for Trump in the primaries, and I was dead wrong. And you saw in the primaries that the Trump media machine was able to outperform the Cruz traditional on-the-ground game. So the Trump media thing is now not without precedent, at least not in the primaries. The question is, will that translate over into the general? And as you said, the wind is against him. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look like just a pure media strategy is going to be effective, which may be why he hired on, I think the guy's name is Stepien. He basically hired on a traditional Republican ground game guy within the last 24 hours before this discussion started because of this very problem.
Yeah, and one of the things that helped me get insight, which you can't get from just looking at crosstabs and polling, no matter how great the polling is to watch the focus groups that they are putting increasingly on American television. You get in with undecided voters and Trump voters, and you hear people's rationales. Why do they find Trump an attractive candidate? You can't get that with polling. And when you get that kind of temperature qualitatively, I think this is why I'm a big fan of mixed methods, of using both quants and qual to triangulate different subpopulations and where they're at. And the kinds of things that were coming out of those focus groups really showed the mindset of frustration of people whose own party had promised them things for 20 years, but most recently in the last 8 years, and had failed to deliver. Overpromised, underdelivered. These are people frustrated with their own party. These people are the kind of like, they'd rather just smash it all to the ground and build it up again. And that was why I kind of was more on the, I think Trump could do it. By November, I think it was October of last year that I predicted he would win the nomination. One last thing on polling before we move to money. I know that in the media, there's a tendency to report, like you said, PPP, different polling firms or that are associated with Democrats, or Rasmussen that are associated with Republicans, and they'll report them as Democratic polling firms or Republican polling firms. And for people who are, yeah, I'm staying with my parents, so got a little, yes.
I'm sure they're used to this by now, aren't they?
Yeah, not well. They know that I do YouTube, but they're not used to me broadcasting in their house. So people might think that PPP goes out and gives polling data to Democratic candidates that makes the Democratic candidate look good, and the Republican pollsters go out and find data that makes the Republican pollsters look good. And I can just tell you from somebody who does polling, works with polling data, and reads a lot of polls, there aren't Democratic pollsters and Republican pollsters. There are good pollsters and bad pollsters, and then you get hired by one party more often than the other. Mm-hmm. And no pollster has any incentive to present skewed results to their clients. Because as a campaign, if you get bad data, you make decisions based on that bad data, and you misappropriate your resources. You target the wrong people. You basically, it's like having a strategy in chess based on an assumption that your opponent is going to make this one move, and they never do. And you end up making a whole series of mistakes. So the point of a polling firm is really to get the best data possible and to be a really reputable polling firm that makes accurate predictions. And that is the quality of data that you want to look at. Nate Silver does a good job of looking at house effects and biases, that might go through based on the way that they collect the data or whatever else. It's not based on their partisanship. It might be the kinds of people they're sampling on the internet or the kinds of people they're sampling on telephones, and we try to estimate what that is so we can correct for it as political scientists. But yeah, when it comes to polling firms, if they say Democratic polling firm or Republican polling firm, don't let that skew the way you perceive the results. The reputation of the polling firm is what really counts. And having a good reputation is earned by making accurate predictions. That's the only thing that counts. So basically,
whoever was advising the Romney campaign in 2012, in the weeks before,
awful.
Was Breitbart polling, perhaps.
Yeah, it was sort of the unskewed data. And the reason the way that the Romney people made fundamental errors, and this is getting back to that likely voter model, is that they didn't think that there would be turnout in the various demographics on par in 2012 that happened when Obama was first elected. They thought the electorate would be more white and older. And so they based all of their estimates by overestimating the white population turnout and overestimating the elderly turnout. And through that, they got results that made it look like they were going to win. That's where they went wrong. They didn't have an accurate model that predicted who was going to come out. And because of that fundamental error, their perception of reality was just wrong. And you saw the Rove meltdown, and you had that famous Megyn Kelly quote, "Is this just math you do as a Republican to make yourself feel better?" I always say, and I think everybody says, you should always run like you're 3 points behind. And you should always take an accurate, what you think is the most accurate, probably voter model, and then as a candidate, still run like you're 3 points behind. So it is, statistics, predicting the future is always hard. Yeah. And predicting what people are going to do based on what they say they're going to do, they might not follow through. They might change their minds. So it's an imprecise science, but it's still science insofar as you're making predictions based on data that are falsifiable and you can check against reality. But this is where some of these, the Republican side goes wrong. And I think even when they tried to unskew the polls over at Breitbart or over at Fox, I'd have to check the source again. But even when they tried a different likely voter model, they still had Clinton up by 2 points.
I have a final question for you at the end of our discussion now. What you've just said has made me think about something. So we'll get there later, yeah? Incentive for you people to keep watching, yeah?
All right, so are we going to take your question now, or are we going to move to money?
No, let's move to money.
All right, money. What? I'm going to kick it back to you because you've made notes and I'm just doing all this off the top of my head. So you be professional, and then I'll do the color commentary on the side.
Very good. I'll be the guy on the CNN or MSNBC with the board, that like the touch board. I guess it was
John Steve
King
Kornacki.
Or Steve Kornacki, yeah. Like
Joy
kind
Reid.
of like yell in that like newscaster voice and start poking around on the screen.
Think it won't go. It won't swipe to the left. Swipe to the left.
God. It never can beat the Jessica Yellen hologram from 2008. Do you remember that?
Oh, it was terrible. It was so bad.
and then waited till election night to broadcast it. It was like, oh, what are you doing? Okay,
Although, if you want to see the cheesiest election night graphics are done by the BBC. Those are always really cheesy election nights. But anyway, go ahead.
Especially when all that polling is wrong. Okay, anyway, speaking of bad polling, British polling. We've talked about this before, I think. Anywho, money. Clinton is doing much better in terms of money and is using her money much more wisely. The end. Okay, let's move on to now.
Yeah.
Okay, so Clinton has raised $692.7 million for her campaign so far. That's roughly double of Trump's $346 million. The biggest donor to Trump is Robert Mercer, who's the CEO of the Renaissance Company, which is an interesting detail that we might get to later about what that has done to his campaign infrastructure when we move on to the mechanism or the machinery. The interesting thing that I would point out is that Trump's spending, I'm sure Christy will want to comment on this, is odd. He's spent $1.8 million in the last few months on hats and on t-shirts and mugs. Compare that to his spending on staff, which was less than $1 million. So he's spent roughly double, not roughly, exactly double amount of money on the stupid hats as he has on people. For example, when we get to machinery, this will become even more relevant. Andrew Cofield is the field staff in Ohio. That's right, one single person is the field staff for the swing state of Ohio, which, as I mentioned earlier, is 18 electoral votes. So it's just bad. Another statistic, 9% of Trump's spending is within his own companies. And it got headlines this week when he was spending more money. He upped the rent in his own campaign headquarters in Trump Tower, just so that he could like funnel more money to himself from his own campaign. Yeah, that's the summary. I mean, otherwise Clinton's just doing the traditional stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So I used to work on campaigns and I was the sort of person who, ran the forlorn Democratic county office where, we would always get blown out, but you had, you put out a presence and you try to get your statewide vote.
I did that work. Yeah. I did it in Texas. Yeah. It's discouraging.
Yes. But if you think about, just think about it from a strategic point of view.
Yes.
As a candidate in the general election, you have people who you already know are going to vote for you. These are the people who want your yard signs. These are the people who put the bumper stickers on. And increasingly, campaigns have had to divert their resources to media. So now, a lot of times, you'll be asked to pay $5 for a yard sign or $2 for a bumper sticker. Why? Well, because they're not going to spend money on votes they've already won. If you're willing to put a yard sign in your yard, you don't have to be motivated or convinced in any meaningful way. So you want to save all that money to get the people who are undecided or on the fence, because that's how you win. So for a campaign, what you really want to do is reduce as much as possible spending on the people who are going to vote for you outside of getting them to the polls. And you want to focus all of your money and time and resources on the people that are swingable, people that are gettable. And so from a classic campaign point of view, having field staff is vital, because it's one thing if a polling company calls you up and asks you on the phone, who are you going to vote for? You've made no effort to do anything. You received the phone call, and anyone can give an opinion on anything. That's not a lot of work. But if you haven't done early voting and it's the day of the election and suddenly the night before your kid gets sick, and you've got to now arrange some kind of childcare for them for school tomorrow, and you're going to end up having to drive farther, and you were going to vote at 7 o'clock in the morning, but you're not going to be able to do that because you have to run your kid to grandma's house and drop them off before you get to work. That's the kind of stuff that field people are there for, is to make sure that that person still finds a way to get to the polls, maybe after work or something, right as the polls are closing. And this is why Obama just blew out Clinton when they were running against each other in the primary. Personal contacts matter. Having somebody in your neighborhood that you know who is the kind of designated, Clinton person or Obama person who's going to come over and check if you need an early voting ballot thing or. So coming back in, we had some technical difficulties, but now we're back on air. Field organization matters. People matter. That personal contact matters. Having a list of people that they voted for the Democrat in the last 3 of the last 4 elections because you have that data set available to you matters. It doesn't really matter if the RNC has the best data micro-targeting software in the world if they don't have boots on the ground to get people to knock on the doors and to cross off their known voters at the polling stations and to check every 4 or 5 hours to see where the turnout is. Are they getting their people out? Is turnout in that polling area higher or lower than what they had predicted? Are they getting it? Because for those of you who haven't worked on a campaign, really good campaigns know exactly how many votes they need to get out of every single constituency or congressional district, even the ones that are going to tilt Republican. If you're running a statewide race, getting an extra 400 votes out in 10 different counties around your state can make a difference, can make a really big difference. So turnout generally is important. If you don't have those people doing that work, if you have, for instance, a 12-year-old as your co-chair for your county in Colorado, in the most populous county in Colorado, you are going to get blown out. You are going to get blown out completely. So that's my...
That 12-year-old was a consummate professional. I don't know if you saw that. That guy was making phone calls. He was more professional than like anyone I've ever... Like he was more professional than like Paul Manafort or whoever the manager was before. Like he was good. Yeah, a little 12-year-old.
I've seen like Kid Preachers, and he kind of came across to me as one of those who've been But this is why spending money on stickers and hats. If he was doing a book tour, he's spending money on venues to do rallies in states where he is going to win, like in Texas. That's a total waste of money. It's a complete waste of money. And from like a rational choice point of view of trying to get out the most swing voters as possible or trying to convert voters, his money, the way he is spending his money, makes absolutely no sense. It's basically self-destructive.
Have you heard the conspiracy theory that he's building a media company and not a presidential staff? That he's basically bringing in Roger Ailes and Sean. I guess we'll have to talk about this with machinery, but I mean, if you were to run a data analysis of where he's going, it doesn't reflect a presidential campaign. The places he's going to is either are places where he's going to micro-target some sort of audience that's already supporting him. As you said it earlier, the people with the "Make America Great Again" signs and hats and T-shirts, or that guy who wore the one piece of the wall. They don't need convincing. And it's the myth of the bumper sticker, right? That people see like "Make America Great Again" and they're like, "Huh, I never thought of it that way. I will vote for Trump." Like, no, I saw a dinosaur eating a Jesus fish on a Nissan. I think I'm going to be an atheist now. Like, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, those things are good too. They're basically expressive benefits for people who are already on your side. They feel good about expressing their opinion. It validates their opinion to put it out there. But those people aren't going to win you the election on their own. And money is, there's a lot of problems with the way American elections are run. But in my opinion, when it comes to Clinton and the way that she's raised her money, don't hate the player, hate the game. If she doesn't run this way, she is, if she decided to, take public finance or something, you get moral points, but that doesn't translate into votes. You want to win. And in this system, you need money to win. That's just the system. It's not down to any individual candidate. It's a problem with our system generally. But Trump's inability to raise sufficient funds for his own campaign means he can't hire the people to build the machinery, and he can't buy the ad time to create a message. And those two things together reduce his momentum. This is all interlinked in terms of campaign organization.
Yeah, I think maybe this is a place where we would depart, but I agree with you. You gotta play the game as it is. And moral points don't win votes, but I do find it disturbing how the Clintons and specifically like the DNC have basically industrialized the fundraising. I think it's a bad trend, but that's a topic for another time. I think that was pretty much all I had to say about money, except for that Clinton and her super PACs have spent $68 million on TV so far. Trump has only spent $4 million on direct TV advertising. And I guess that's because he assumes that he'll make up the difference in media headlines and news cycles by saying crazy things like Vladimir Putin should spy on Clinton emails and that Hillary Clinton's a bigot and that he'll win the media war without spending any money, which could be true.
Right. In the campaigns, you'll hear people talk about two kinds of media, paid media and free media. Paid media is what you buy with your money and you control the message. And free media is free, but you don't control the spin. You don't control the message. And, we might be on the cusp now of a point in time where people are so, at least in the United States, people have access to so many different forms of communications. There's, basically they've got TiVo, they've got cable, they've got YouTube and the internet, they've got things on their phone, they've got Twitter. Back in the day, in the 70s, when there were 3 stations in public television, they had a monopoly on communications. And if, like, the famous ad about the girl with the daisy ad, that stuff got seen because everybody had access to that. Now, you can watch whatever channel you want on cable. It's much harder to get a message out to people because we're segmenting out into the kinds of things we like. And for Trump, yes, in the primary, were people who were highly engaged and paying a lot of attention. He really was able to take advantage of things like Twitter and the media he generated from Twitter to suck all of the air out of the room, to put the attention on himself. He's still doing that, but it's harming him now more than it's helping him. The question is, will Clinton's ads, will they just, I don't know that they're necessarily going to change any minds. I think her ads are probably really out there to just maintain the narrative that Trump is too dangerous to be elected, and maybe to try to get her favorables up. I would like to see her run some more positive spots on herself, and I would also like to see some more policy things to present herself as a credible alternative to Trump. But the spending on television might not make the kind of impact that it has in the past, simply because of the diversification of communications and social media. So we'll see how that plays out. But
it's amazing to think that. Oh, sorry.
No. Go ahead. You finish, and then I'll talk about field.
It's amazing to think about what media manipulation was back in the day. For example, 1968, I think it was, the Nixon campaign got called out for. They had like these suspicious offices that were staffed by usually young women getting minimum wage, whatever the hell that was at the time, and they would call up people that were voting for Lyndon Johnson, and they would or not Lyndon Johnson, but Hubert Humphrey, or maybe this was the primaries. It's been a while since I've read this, but they did the dark calling where they call up people and pretend to be pollsters and ask, like, are you voting for Nixon's opponent? If they said yes, they go, oh, why would you do that? Are you such a bad guy? Oh my gosh, and they were harassing people. And that was considered controversial at the time. And we're in an age now where anything goes. It's just so different. To credit your point, what you said earlier about the media dynamic now is it's a totally different paradigm.
Yeah, definitely. And one last thing on money, but one thing that Clinton had, regardless of the media buys, having that much money and having a traditional campaign structure has allowed her to blow him out of the water in terms of field staff and field organization. And I think that's going to end up really making a difference on election day. So were we going to go to machinery next, or do you want to build on that?
Let's go to machinery. I can transition us over, but I wanted to add one little thing about money as well. And television ads specifically, is that I don't know exactly how Hillary's spending her money on or what her super PACs are doing, but I do know that the most recent ad to be released was linking Trump to the Ku Klux Klan, and I know that Tim Kaine was doing the same thing in his own speech recently, and so I guess this is more of a conversation point for messaging, but it looks to me that the money is being spent on making Trump look, well, illustrating how Trump is as a crazy person. Yeah. Machinery. I think you'll probably have more about the Trump machinery than I do. It's a lot harder to put into numbers. But what I was thinking about, if we consider the vice president a piece of machinery that can be moved around, I was thinking about how amazing it is that both vice presidential picks have been virtually inconsequential. For example, today, and I'm a little embarrassed to say it because I call myself the political junkie, right? But I was writing down vice president, my talking point right now is writing down, okay, vice presidents, inconsequential, Mike Pence and I had to go to Google and type in Hillary VP to remember the guy's name, Tim Kaine. And That's embarrassing.
Can I make a confession as well? I made a video critical of Trump, and in the end I was going to put, Clinton Kane 2016, and I wrote out Kane, and I went, is that spelled right? And I went to Google, like, no, I not even spelled his name right. Okay, I'm really glad I checked this before I put the video out. Yeah, it's well, that's, I think, also a consequence of the fact that this election is a referendum on Trump, but he's made it a referendum on Trump.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Did you see the video on side note? Did you see the video of Mike Pence in the barbershop? You gotta watch that.
No.
Oh, you gotta watch that.
No.
He goes to a black barbershop, and the barber's like, "What's your name again?" It's like, "Mike Pence." Okay, who are you? It's like, "I'm running with Donald Trump." And then the guy, he's a black guy, right? He's like, all right, okay. Like he obviously becomes visibly uncomfortable, and there's just this pause with the cameras. Oh, it's so bad. Okay, but if you consider them moving parts and pieces of the machinery, Tim Kaine is somewhat useful. He speaks passable Spanish, so that's good, and so that can be utilized. I don't know what Mike Pence brings to the table besides that he can just go around and say, he can look presentable with his clean haircut. But that's how I saw the machinery conversation, is saying that vice presidents are basically like irrelevant already, and I can't even wait to see the debate and what the ratings are for them.
Oh yeah, that's right. They're going to have a debate, aren't they? I forget that the vice presidents are going to debate. Yeah, they have one debate scheduled. To me, like Mike Pence, the image I get of him is, I don't think that, maybe I saw this as a political cartoon, but if it doesn't exist, it should. Trump as a GOP elephant, and Mike Pence is the person behind the elephant cleaning up the crap as it goes. Like, I don't know if I just saw that, but that would be, for me, like, that's my political cartoon of the Trump campaign.
All of Trump's spokespersons, people are that. All of them, those poor people. If they weren't also sycophantic in supporting Trump, I'd feel bad for them. But yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's a perfect.
There's another aspect of the Trump campaign that I don't think gets picked up enough, and that is the weird fact that his children are his primary surrogates, more so than his wife, which is kind of, it's very not traditional, because normally by the time you have a vice presidential ticket, you've got the sort of the four top tier, which is the candidate spouse, the vice presidential candidate, and the vice presidential candidate spouse, like POTUS FLOTUS and V POTUS and V PLOTUS, whatever it's for the lady, the first lady vice president.
Watch your language.
Yeah. And unlike regular campaigns where you have that, even when it comes to spokespeople, as you said, I can't think of another time where nepotism, Trump has got a bubble of his family around him in a way that most candidates don't, and more like a third world dictator fashion than a traditional American candidate. I mean, it's not as if, this is it. Why are the Trump children out there talking about their dad as if they were planning on taking up roles in his presidency if he were to win? I can't think of a parallel.
I don't know either. I mean, they have done interviews, the children have. So I wouldn't say that they're completely invisible, but they just aren't, especially on Fox News. Is it Eric Trump, the oldest son? He's on Fox News all the time. But really the only one of those kids that's relatively effective is Ivanka. And I don't see her too often, but perhaps we know she has influence. She was part of the reason that Paul Manafort was hired and that Paul Manafort was fired. And we know that she and the children play big critical moments in the decision making. So it's not as though they're completely disconnected. Perhaps they just don't get as much media attention because what they're saying is totally benign or banal and not
both.
Banal
for sure.
Bengal tiger, yeah. Perhaps that's the reason. And by the way, I want to add one little thing. It's not related to politics, but for the viewers out there, it's really hot. I'm toweling myself off. Yeah, I took a cold shower before even doing this because it's so hot. So I apologize for the sweatiness. I'm not nervous. It's just the temperature is outrageous.
You know, we were saying off air, I was coming back to Wisconsin looking forward to high temperatures because Germany had been so, you know, like in the mid 70s and low 80s, and I like a good few hot days. I'm like, all right, I'm going to fly out to Wisconsin and get some late August hot weather. Well, now it's raining and about 60 something here, and it's over 100 degrees in Cologne, which is a little tolerable, but I would prefer a little bit of heat before it gets cold again. So yes,
I'm so jealous.
You got your towel on hand.
I do. I've got my towel on hand. Do you want to talk now perhaps about the media? It's kind of a piece of the money and a piece of the machinery, the media thing.
Yeah, let's go.
I teased earlier that Robert Mercer was the #1 funder of Trump, and Rachel Maddow had a wonderful piece a day ago, or maybe 2 days ago, about Mercer. And the one thing that connects Bannon, is it Steve Bannon?
That might be it. I'd have to check, but let's just say it is for the purposes of this call.
Oh, Steve Bannon. Somebody can correct me in the comments. And Kellyanne Conway, the more straight Republican strategist. The only thing that connects them is Mercer. Conway was running Cruz's super PAC prior to joining the Trump campaign. Bannon and Breitbart are partially funded by Mercer, actually largely funded by Mercer. And so the two things connecting them are this one guy. So if you take Mercer, and then of course the two people he's brought in then, Conway and Bannon, you add in Roger Ailes, who we know is now advising the Trump campaign, Sean Hannity, the conservative talk radio host with 2.8 million listeners, advising, and we already know that Trump has the ear of people like Alex Jones and Mark Levin. You have a very interesting group of people that are advising Donald Trump. Another one of his advisors wrote a blog post about how the Civil War was about free speech and the First Amendment, which I've never heard before. I've heard states' rights. I've never heard the First Amendment was the reason for the Civil War. That's new. And all that to say that the Trump money machine, which is much smaller than the Clinton machine, is really the Trump-Mercer money machine. And the media presence of Trump and all of these people are really the machinery that's moving him along.
I think maybe an analogy for the Trump campaign in terms of its messaging is like a teenager who, when they're a teenager, they can eat all kinds of crap, like McDonald's and everything else, and they don't put on any weight. There are no consequences for what they put in their body because they're burning it up so fast. It's actually kind of, it's not having an impact. But then their metabolism starts to slow down, and all of this starts to, layers of fat start going on. If you don't change your habits, your body starts to change.
Trump, I have no experience with this. I don't know what you're talking about.
And Trump in the primary could get away with saying basically whatever he wanted to without consequences. And he started to think he could walk on water and be Trump. He could just be Trump all the time. And in the general election, now that people are taking him more seriously, and he's being seen as a possible president sitting in the White House, all of this stuff is now going on to him. And his reaction has been really interesting. If you contrast his primary media coverage, he was going on MSNBC, he was going on CNN, he was going on Fox, he was going anywhere, to talk to anyone. And increasingly, he's moved. He's appearing only on Fox. Mm-hmm. Instead of widening his media presence, he's narrowing his media presence. It should have been just the opposite. He should have been only doing Fox in the primary because that's where his voters were. And he should be expanding his media presence across, the mainstream media in the general. And he's retreating into a little Fox bubble. Again, all of this shows a disconnect with the general electorate, and his campaign is a reflection of that. He basically, Breitbart has been his champion. He found someone from Breitbart. Fox has been his champion. He's given cover to a man who is multiple times accused of sexual harassment. That's the kind of people he wants to hang out with. As you say, this Mercer guy is funding Breitbart and is also funding his campaign. So the kinds of, his world is getting narrower and narrower and more of a bubble. Which again, they've got that problem like the unskewed polls. You're getting a distorted picture of what the world looks like based on bad data. And remind me again of the name of the woman who's recently become his campaign manager.
Kellyanne Conway.
Kellyanne Conway, yes. I read a piece about, I think it was linked in Huffington Post, but apparently the way that she deals with him is to treat him like a pampered, spoiled child. She has to say, instead of giving him direct criticism of what he's doing wrong and how he's failing. She always couches it in this really soft language of giving him a compliment and then structuring it like, it would be better if we softened our language on immigration to get the impression that we don't want to hurt people. And you hear him parroting her kind of language, but it goes against his true nature of what he wants to say. And also because he is so addicted to these rallies, which again is a bubble factor, he wants to get the audience applause and validation from his message. And so when he's not getting that kind of intense crowd pleasing stuff because he's moderating his message, I think he gets dragged back into wanting the adoration and wanting the validation. And it's really just undercutting his entire campaign.
You know what I haven't heard yet is, I'm sure someone said it, but I haven't heard it yet, is that with this softening on immigration that's supposedly happening, before this took place a month ago, one of the criticisms you would hear is you go to a Trump supporter and you ask, hey, what are Trump's policies? Besides the wall, besides immigration, what are his policies? And now with immigration off the table, he literally has no policies. That's it. That was the only one where we were sure that's what he believes in, and that's gone. So there's nothing left. There's nothing left.
Yeah, he really threw Ann Coulter under the bus, which I, of course, appreciated and enjoyed because she had just released a book set in Trump We Trust. And so the only thing he could do to alienate his base is to change his position on immigration on the day that he changed his position. Now, the thing is, all candidates make that pivot. Well, all traditional candidates make that pivot from the primary to the general. And this is why, in the end, I was more in favor of a Clinton candidacy than a Bernie Sanders one, because she is more moderate and can pick up places like Utah, places like Georgia, because she can appeal to those sort of middle of the road people because she's not as extreme. No one's going to label her a socialist or a communist. I mean, okay, some people will call her a communist, but they're on the far right. She's much more palatable to the center, and I think that's why people on the left don't like her, because she's willing to compromise and go that far. Like I said, I like to win, and I'd rather have it someone with a D in the office than an R, because the overall policy outcomes will be better, in my opinion, with Democrats and Republicans. But Trump and his messaging, he didn't change his messaging right after the convention, and the later he left it, the more it looks like that traditional flip-flop, and it undercuts his credibility. And he's really put himself in that bind of his position is too extreme for the general election, but because he's so associated with it, him trying to change now, one, it alienates his own base, and two, when he does try to appeal to non-white voters, he doesn't know how to talk to people. He doesn't know how to talk to women voters. He knows how to talk to older white men who are just like him, or people who like to hear the messages from those quarters. People who listen to older white men like Rush Limbaugh, like Alex Jones, like Sean Hannity. People who are used to viewing those speakers as having authority and representing those values are connecting with Trump. But if you think that telling African Americans that you're living in poverty and you're unemployed, it just shows how disconnected he is from the lived experience of a lot of African Americans and Hispanic Americans and Asian Americans and Muslim Americans and people who aren't in his little sub-demographic.
Yeah. I didn't put any notes down about the Trump's appeals to minority voters recently, because I think they speak for themselves. There's not much to be said. They're sad and not even worth the time to talk about, honestly. One of the things that I really wanted to speak about today, and something that's been bothering me since the conventions, actually, much has been said about the normalization of the alt-right and the normalization of crazy rhetoric in the campaign, and that Trump's dragged us all down. And that's obviously clearly true. It's reflected in the fact that the bigot word has been used a million times now in the last week. But what's driving me crazy as well is the normalization of extreme nationalism. And the Trump people have brought nationalism so to the forefront that it's also dragged the Democrats into a very nationalist place as well. And I know a lot of commentators were very pleased at the DNC to see like chants of USA and like a million flags. I kind of find it a disturbing development. When Hillary Clinton stands in front of one giant American flag with 8 other American flags in front of it, I get uncomfortable. And I know that that's not a mainstream opinion to have in the States, but only 100 years has gone by since the First World War, a war that was started because of a large and uncontrollable amount of nationalism, arguably. And we're seeing all over the world, and specifically in Western Europe and in the States, this rebuilding of nationalism. And I wonder what the future will hold if even the Democrats now are becoming the party of the USA chants and what I would call it's not just American exceptionalism, which as an idea, America's great. The question is, do you think America's intrinsically great, or do you think America's great because we've been all working together to build something great? And if your opinion is that there's something intrinsically better about America, which is a message I think is being trumpeted more by the Democrats, then that's not a good development. I know that's a bit aside from the campaign at large, but it's something that I've been wanting to say and haven't had a chance to do it.
I think you and I would both distinguish between the notions of patriotism and nationalism. And being a patriot, I mean, I feel like the reason that I consider myself as a patriot is because I love my country, both for what it is and also for what it could be and it isn't. I'm willing to acknowledge that there are massive flaws in our country, that you can do open carry if you're white and you can't do open carry if you're black, that we have issues of racial profiling where so if you look at drug rates, marijuana use, they're basically similar between the white and the black population, but blacks are 3 times more likely to get arrested for marijuana possession than whites. We see issues where men convicted of rape are given probation and not put on sex registers so that they can have a college experience. We have serious problems in this country, and I know that we can be better. And I want us to be better. I want us to be a place where everyone gets treated equally and feels safe.
Mm-hmm.
That's my patriotism. To say love it or leave it, that's nationalism. That's saying, I don't care what flaws we have now. If you don't like exactly the situation you're in, then you are not a lover of this country. And that's where I disagree with nationalism. It's no matter what my country, right or wrong. To me, that makes no sense whatsoever. And yet we've seen, I think in some ways, Trump left a vacuum because Trump didn't really focus on the veterans in a positive way. He didn't talk about America in that way. The Democrats saw tactically an opportunity to be that thing that normally Republicans are. Have you watched the John Oliver analysis of both the Republican and Democratic conventions?
Mm-hmm.
He talks a little bit, about, if an alien came down and they saw the Democrats. So I think that was a tactical message. I don't know that it's going to carry over very long. But yeah, the rise of far-right nationalism, it's not the rise of it, it's always existed, but the mainstreaming of it
Mm-hmm.
is very, very troubling to me as well.
And these movements don't need to win majorities to have a voice and to change the national dialogue. And I use an extreme example. Before I say it, just everybody, I'm not playing the Nazi card, okay? But just for the sake of the dialogue here, the National Socialists in Germany only got like 33% in their winning election, 33%, and that was something that changed world history. And so I'm not saying I don't want to dip down to the Nazi or the fascist level yet, because if you do that, there's nowhere else to go. But I will just say that if you're not concerned about the rise of nationalism, then you should be, because it doesn't need 51%. These sorts of movements are born and bred on the silent minority, or the silent majority, as they call themselves, and what are really just a very loud minority. I don't like the development that I'm seeing, and I also feel strange that if I carry this conversation on with an American, that they become uncomfortable at the idea that I don't buy into that philosophy of American exceptionalism, or at least intrinsic American exceptionalism.
There is, I think, a nexus in the Republican Party of, a belief in God, a faith-based approach to the existence of the supernatural, a faith-based approach to the role of the markets, and the markets being this magical thing that just need to be let go of and unregulated, and they'll just make everything great. And I think that there is a faith-based view of America as the best country in the world, regardless of data that shows the ways that we are failing, like maternal mortality rates in Texas being on par with like developed countries. We have big problems, and one of the things that I think nationalism does is it turns your political opponents, your fellow citizens who disagree with you, into your political enemies. And you don't listen to your enemies. You have to debate your opponents. You have to listen to your opponents, because they have an oppositional position and you want to defend it. But if they're your enemy, then you can just shut them down and not listen. And that is what ends up dividing countries, dividing people, is when you dismiss someone on a basis of a series of assumptions instead of trying to engage with them on the basis of their arguments.
Which is tough with the alt-right. It's so tough. Like my channel's been growing recently, and a couple of the videos that I've posted have dealt with topics that invite that sort of rhetoric of the alt-right. So I had a video about Islam, and I had a video about Brexit, and it's been discouraging to see the level of the dialogue and how low it can be. And I started debating with those people, and then I stopped because I think it's a volume question on YouTube, of course, and what can you do in 24 hours in a day. But on a more emotional level, it's hard to engage with someone who doesn't seem to be sincerely engaging, but rather just being a nationalist, being an extremist for the sake of being an extremist. It's difficult.
On a slightly related, but also kind of a tangent, you and I both live in Germany. And I can't tell you the number of times that I have seen people in America talking about the problems in Germany now with all the refugees because, and this is their words, not mine, that these people come over with a certain kind of mindset and they just want to bring over Sharia law in their way of life. I work with several colleagues who used to live in Iran and got jobs because of their IT skills and stuff, or not just my job, but other parts of my life. I have a collection of people who left Iran, and then basically, like, in terms of their faith, they're either like really casual Muslims, some practicing, but they don't wear stuff. They don't, kind of like maybe they do some holidays, like, like Christians do Easter and Christmas, but it's not a massive thing. And some who've said, I'm an atheist. They can say that in Germany. They can't say that in Iran. So the assumption that somehow people who are coming from these theocratic nations don't want liberation, don't want an opportunity to be themselves, just shows the extent to which they are disconnected from the real people. Because, I've got several Muslim friends who have a range of from atheism to, so practicing Muslims. And that isn't reflective of my lived experience with people who have higher education and who were seeking, who wanted more contact with the world. You end up excluding potential allies for modernizing Islam when you paint them all with a radicalist brush.
Yeah, and that's maybe, I really want to talk about this, but I also feel like maybe we're getting off topic. But
yeah, I agree. But go ahead, one thing, and then we'll get back on.
I'll just say one thing is that of course, one would be foolish to say, I don't know what the exact numbers are anymore, but it was 1 million in 1 year, it'll probably be 3 or 4 million by the time it's over. One would be foolish to say that such a migration movement would have no impact on a country. Of course, there will be challenges. Of course, the second generation will be a problem, just like it is in France. But that doesn't mean that German society is crumbling. And there was a mass migration of Muslims for a very long time after World War II into Germany, the Turks. And most of the Turks that I meet, granted anecdotal, but I teach plenty of secular Turks right now who are appalled by extremist Islam. So the German society is not crumbling, and it should not be used as a rhetorical piece to talk about the woes of Europe, especially when you look at things like healthcare and unemployment, both of which are doing much better here. Anyway, actually, I can transition really well.
Yeah.
I can transition super well. Trump was using another European recently, Nigel Farage, to illustrate this point, which I thought was so strange to watch Farage up there on the stage talking about Brexit in Jackson, Mississippi. But it shows how off topic Trump has gone. Like, why is Nigel Farage campaigning with him? Why is that relevant or interesting?
It's crazy. Yeah, and the thing about Trump's message is he doesn't have one. I think this is it. Trump has managed to make the presidential campaign a referendum on himself, and not in a good way. And I know that he also tends to be I'm rubber, you're glue, whatever you say, come to me, bounces back on you. Whatever criticisms come at him, he will just turn around and use the exact same criticism back at the other person, whether or not it makes any sense. And this means that he is not managing his message. He is always in a reactive mode. And he has a really big problem with just taking a blow, with just taking a criticism and not reacting, not pushing back. And from having a YouTube channel, I certainly know from having a YouTube channel, there are some people who are just going to pour hate in your comments. Probably me more than you.
I can't tell you how many filters I've added in the last month. So many filters. Every time I open my inbox, I find a new word I didn't know you could insult people with. Have you gotten a death threat before, Kristen?
Yeah, well, I've had people, not a direct one, but it implied one. I actually made a video on feminist response to a death threat, one of my earlier videos, because I had somebody do something that was an implied death threat. Yeah.
I got either from an account with an ISIS profile picture and an Arabic name. I got either a death threat or a sexual invitation because the comment said, "We will come fuck you soon," and I was like, "Oh, like I'm either gonna die." I'm gonna have some sexual intercourse with an ISIS sympathizer. I don't know which one, but I should be afraid either way. But sorry, yeah. Another off topic. But you're totally right. Like Trump, like you and we're not impervious to criticism, but you have to have a thick skin to be in the public sphere. Trump does not. You mentioned earlier that Trump's obsessed with the crowds. He cannot be booed. He cannot take criticism on Twitter. He watches morning news programs like Morning Joe and tweets at them with like vague threats when they say they don't support him anymore or whatever. They don't like what he's doing. He's incredibly thin-skinned. He's spending money on hats and on Twitter messages and not on organization. It's a disaster. And the question is, and this leads me to my final question for you pretty well, is if this whole thing could work. Like so the Nate Silver odds on 538 are 81% Hillary. I'm wondering, first of all, what are your odds? So we can get this on camera. I'll give you my odds. And my second question is, and my final question for you is, what do you think the turnout will be compared to like 2012 and 2008? And does higher turnout mean better for Trump, or does it mean something better for Hillary? So, yeah.
Before I answer, and you might have to remind me of the questions, because there were like, I think 3. First is, if you go and read the description of narcissistic personality disorder, watch Trump in action. I think this is the problem. I mean, I'm not a doctor and I'm not going to make a diagnosis, but I notice a lot of similarities between the description of the kind of fragile ego, need for constant validation, reinforcement, adulation, and inability to take any kind of criticism with the description of narcissistic personality disorder and Trump. And I think you could probably look through the entire campaign through that lens, and it maps on really well. So the first question was what the percentage is going to be, and I think I would put 100%.
Your forecast.
100% yeah, I mean,
Hillary.
barring like she has some kind of massive health crisis, and drops dead.
That's not 100%. That's 99%.
Okay, 99.9%. So a little bit for chance. But if the ceteris paribus, all things being equal, the same that they are right now, there's no way she can lose. I don't see how she can lose even in a close race. Turnout is much more difficult at this point. I think I would like to see, obviously, as any pollster, the closer you get to an election, the more accurate your predictions become. I think turnout's going to be really difficult to predict this time because I think there's going to be a large number of people in probably, I would hope, the swing states who I think people in California and New York and safe places would feel fine voting for Stein or voting for Johnson. But if you're in a marginal state, I think that there might be more of an impetus where your vote feels like it counts more to get out and vote. And I think that there's a lot of people who aren't, sort of like the older white demographic who might want to vote against Trump. So I think that there might be a lot of motivation of people who find him scary and don't want him in office. That will drive up turnout. That is complicated by these independent voters who might be turned off by the entire election and just decide to check out because they don't really care one way or the other, or they assume Clinton's going to win. And then you've got the Republican base, which is difficult if you don't know they're going to be demotivated and not turn up, or they're going to turn up and only vote down ballot. So if you're asking just about presidential turnout, I think it's one of the hardest to predict ever because of all of these machinations going on in the based on where people are.
I'm
So
glad you have that opinion, because I have the same. I have no idea. So I'm happy to like be unconfident and have other people be unconfident with me in this regard.
and this is why the field operation counts more than ever.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah, and Trump's not doing his.
No, I guess I would agree that the odds are pretty well in Hillary's favor. If the third party people, if Gary Johnson were to get to that threshold and get into a debate, we might be able to talk about the chance of a spoiler effect. But we're not there yet. I'm curious what Gary Johnson would do if he were to start trending well in the polls. We're talking 15, 20%. Where would he go? What I'd like to know is, where is Johnson spending his time now? For those of you who are watching, my next video coming out on the 1st will be about Nader. And one of the things that he did wrong, which I talk about in the video, is he focused on swing states in the critical moments. The question for Johnson will be, where does he go if he gets a boost? That would impact my percentage. This is the only reason I bring it up.
Yeah, I don't get a good sense of what the end goal of the Libertarian candidate is. I mean, it's impossible for him to win. Just impossible. But what is his, is he there basically as a conscience vote? In which case, Utah, I think Wisconsin, he could go to places where Trump didn't perform very well, or is performing, Pennsylvania, and present himself as an alternative. But he's really, as you say, just playing a spoiler candidate. I know we're going to wrap it up, but did you see that in terms of the machinery part of it? I forgot to mention this when we were on that topic, but that Trump hadn't filed his paperwork to get on the Minnesota ballot as yet.
What is the deadline?
That well, there were two deadlines. Minor party candidates has already passed, and every other campaign has already filed it. It's only 2,000 signatures, which, I mean, I could organize 2,000 signature collection over a weekend if it was my job. So I think he'll get on the ballot, but I think it was the 31st of August. And this was 2 or 3 days ago that they hadn't filed their paperwork yet with their 2,000 signatures asking for the opportunity to be put on the ballot, which is insane. And again, it's a symptom. It's like a what do you call that? When you're fatal, like really bad situation. Your campaign is on life support if you haven't even organized to get 2,000 signatures in an entire state and filed that before pressing up against the deadline. It's just, to me, it's like firing level of incompetence.
Mm-hmm. No, I'd agree. It's like when I tried to write my term papers or something when I was at uni, or was in college, like same thing. I do it the night before, tossing in the sources at the, like, that shouldn't be how you run a presidential campaign. But honestly, we said this as the last thing, and it's not the worst thing we've said about, it's like, it's actually quite boring compared to all the other garbage that we've had to talk about during this hour and a half of Trump. If I could just make one final point about this whole scenario, was I made my beef about nationalism, and now I'll just make my beef about the media coverage at the moment. And I think we are probably just as guilty as everyone else, is that the media is talking in circles right now. There's nothing new to talk about. The candidates can talk about bigot and racist, and they can go a little bit farther, but the media itself is in a big cycle. I saw Eugene Robinson's column on Real Clear Politics, and the title was something like, "Trump is an angry, like, race baiting, blah, blah, blah." And I was like, did this column come out today or a year ago? Like, it's nothing new. And I wonder, what in the world are we going to talk about in the next 70 days or whatever it is until election day? Because it feels like everything's been exhausted.
And I think that's working against Trump, personally. I think he was interesting at first and amusing and shocking, and people would react to him. And I think after a year and a half, I think people are getting fed up of it. Because can you imagine 4 years of this? Every day in the White House, he would be doing something crazy. It would bring government to a standstill. It would be impossible to get anything done. Paul Ryan really think that he can negotiate with a guy who changes his mind every 5 minutes, depending on who he spoke to last or what crowd gave him, the biggest applause line, applause for an applause line. The word that I was thinking of is to kind of wrap up my impression of the Trump campaign overall. Besides Trumpster fire, but it would be Bush League. It's not a professional organization. And I think this is also part of the reason why the media coverage ends up the way it is, because he's not running a professional campaign. He doesn't know how to message. He doesn't know how to communicate with the nation. He only knows how to communicate with his in-group. And he communicates all the time. And because he's a candidate, everything he says is potentially news. And he doesn't understand anything about discipline. He doesn't understand anything about messaging. He doesn't understand how to communicate to different demographics besides his own, the ones that he's comfortable with. And I think that, we can crap on the media, and people do, and I get that. But on the other hand, he's putting out so much content all the time that they're covering it because he's a serious candidate all the time, and it's really skewing our discourse. I think we have to basically move beyond Trump to have a sane political discourse again. We need to have somebody who doesn't have all of the same traits as narcissistic personality disorder people would have, because right now it's all about, this is his ultimate fantasy. If he was winning, oh my gosh, can you even imagine how much worse he would be if he was ahead in the polls instead of behind? And I think that a lot of this dysfunction in the media will remedy itself, and we'll go back to the normal crap media once we get beyond this election and we're dealing with professional candidates and professional politicians once again.
Yeah, that positive note to end on.
Yeah, we'll go from being utterly crap to just being normal crap. Look forward to that, everybody. And dysfunctional government for another 2 years with nothing getting done. Yeah.
Ooh.
The thing that, the founders gave us a very vibrant form of government, but it was a government built in a time where everybody who had power was the same. They were all propertied, wealthy, well-educated, upper-class white men. And between those individuals, you could have a gentleman's agreement, and you could negotiate and make trades and barter back and forth and scratch each other's backs. But as our democracy has become more representative, it's now representing a wider range of views. And that makes it difficult when one side says, we will never compromise. Mm-hmm. It breaks down the essential assumption of a checks and balance and a separation of power, which is that reasonable people will want to compromise and are willing to take half a loaf rather than hold out for a whole for the good of the country.
I think what Christy's trying to say is that we need to go back to a time when
we need to take away votes from women, and we need to go back and just give all the power back to the white men. That's what I'm saying.
Powdered wigs 2020, powdered wigs 2020. Wouldn't it be? Woo.
Yes. Oh, this has been really therapeutic for me, because I've had all this stuff rattling around in my head, and to kind of talk it out with you always makes me happy, even if it's depressing.
Yep, I enjoyed it as well.
As always. So for those of you who are watching, go to Will's channel. I will provide a link in the description box below. Watch his latest video and keep a lookout for his high quality but less frequent videos. I know I just tend to make stuff up and go on air like this and put it out. And you are very thoughtful and well prepared, and you do fantastic stuff. Yes. And we talked, again, we talked about doing something on election night. So make sure you put it on your calendars. It'll probably be at my channel, I would imagine, but we are going to try very hard to do a live stream of the election coverage on the night of the election to give you our take. So you'll be able to flip between, MSNBC and CNN and Fox and maybe the Young Turks and us. So put that in your calendar.
We're coming for you, Jink Uger.
Yes, we're going to challenge him for dominance. So yes, thanks to Will. I'll let you say goodbye to the viewers.
Yeah, thanks everyone for your time, and keep on keeping on.
And the countdown has begun. We're less than 100 days now, so it's only like 2.5 more months of this crap, and then we'll be done. So, all right. So to everybody who's watching, thank you again. I've been Christy. You've been awesome, and I will see you very soon. Bye-bye.